Good afternoon. This is Dr. Allocca broadcasting from Prague at the International Transpersonal Conference 2017. I'm in the company of Robert Hahn, which is an expert in a number of entheogenic domains, and he delivered a very important account on an entheogen that is very poorly known, potentially highly dangerous, and one that needs a lot more education and information about. Robert, would you like to give a little overview of your background to our listeners?
So I began my studies in biochemistry originally at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia.
Sure.
And then I moved into communication, human behavioral science, and then later into photography, but photography as a tool for inner exploration. And also began my really work into spiritual psychology, I guess you could say.
Sure.
And then,
which is another way to describe transpersonal psychology.
yes. And then I was a founding director of the Institute of Ecotechnics.
Sure.
And we actually, as I was mentioning, have a project outside of Derby.
What does the Institute do?
So the Institute was founded to develop an ecology of techniques and a techniques of ecology. We recognized in the early 70s, when we were formed, that there was an imbalance between the biosphere and the technosphere, and that the biosphere was in danger of being destroyed by the technosphere. So one of our first projects was to build a research vessel, which we called Heraclitus, after the pre-Socratic Greek philosopher Heraclitus. And so the first major expedition, I was the scientific chief and overall organizer for, and we spent 2 years in the upper Amazon doing ethnopharmacological field work with shaman of the Northwest Amazon.
Excellent. In Brazil?
We went through Brazil and on the Amazon River,
Sure.
and then we worked in Peru, where we had permission to collect plants and carry out studies. I had a phytochemical laboratory on board the ship.
Okay.
And
a scientific vessel.
Eventually became known by the sobriquet Rio for Rio Amazonas after my friends felt I had mastered the river. In any case, that was my first exposure to the Datura plant. And I was writing in Colombia during that time with a botanist who had been referred to me by my mentor for the expedition, Richard Evans Schultes, who had been head of the Harvard Botanical Museum and is known as the father of modern ethnobotany. And I picked one of the Datura flowers and was carrying it in the car, beautiful specimen.
Yes.
And the botanist's wife, who was with us in the car, after about 10 minutes insisted that I throw it out because she was beginning to become sick from the fumes. Then my deep exposure, you could say, to Datura was in Nepal, where I worked with Swami Jyoti, who was a Hindu Swami who had been taken at the age of 6 from his family and trained in the Hindu sacred Sanskrit texts, and began a lifelong practice of using Datura orally. Daily. So Swami took Datura 2 times in the morning, 2 times in the afternoon, and 2 times in the evening as part of the betel quid that he chewed every day, which of course the betel quid is quite common in the subcontinent. But I couldn't find any reference in the literature to anyone who had actually used the betel quid with Datura.
Absolutely.
So Swami made a Datura paste, and I recall the first time we were at Hotel Vajra there, where he served as our librarian for our East-West library, and I had been questioning him, and we had been talking about his Datura use. And he finally got to the point where he said, well, okay, I'm going to introduce you to it.
Sure.
So he gave me some of the paste, and I took it into my mouth. And the quid, when you chew it, you don't swallow it. You spit it out afterwards.
Okay.
And so, I began to feel some effects, and then I got up to go out to the taxi because we were going to a Hindu ceremony that normally Westerners aren't allowed to, but he was taking me. And so I'm walking along, and I'm walking here, the taxi's over there, and the next thing I know, I'm picking myself up off the ground. And during that moment between consciousness of I'm walking and I'm picking myself back up off the ground, I would say that I could have experienced the entire history of the universe within that brief moment. And so that, I think, became a real stimulus for me to go deeper into Datura usage. And as I began to study it, I began to understand that it was an extremely dangerous plant.
100%.
And I think that's something that everyone needs to really take very seriously.
How many times have you done Datura so far? An estimate.
At this point, I don't remember.
Lost
a lot of times.
A lot of times.
And it's been a combination of my own experience and studying the literature and the reports of Datura use, which we found it dates back to prehistory. If you recall in my talk, I had a slide from Egyptian times, and also it's been used in initiation rites by South American and Amerindian cultures. It was used by witches, reportedly used by witches as one of the ingredients in the salve they would put on their broomsticks, along with henbane and mandrake.
And hence the iconography of witches riding the broom.
Yes.
This was to facilitate the actual absorption of the preparation on the broomstick through the groin.
Yes, through the vaginal membranes.
Absolutely.
And that's where the idea came, or the image of the flying witch, because then they would enter a altered state of consciousness, and they describe that experience as flying.
How much do you remember overall of all your Datura explorations? How much has been retained in your memory, do you think? If you were to give a percentage.
Yeah. Well, let me say that my use of Datura, so I began to study it in depth, and I found some of the best work came out of India, where it's been used for a long period of time. And it was classified as a deliriant. And so it has both deliriant and cholinergic properties. So after my work with Swami, I was very, very cautious about using it, and have only briefly tried it as a tea or digesting it again as Swami prepared in his paste. But through my use and study of it, I developed the technique of smoking it. And I use the dried flowers, taking them, when they're still hanging, letting them brown a bit, and then taking them off and then fully drying them.
In the sun?
In the sun is best, but if you're in a humid environment, you can use a plant dryer or an oven. Sure. The lower the heat, the better. And then powdering that and smoking it. Now, what I've found by doing that is that you can titrate the effect so that you can see what the effect is on you as an individual And of course, you want to have someone present who's also watching you.
Of course, especially with Datura, a trip sitter is absolutely key in terms of safety anyway.
So by doing it by smoking, I found you can watch the effect, which comes on very quickly,
Yes.
and then add more as you want. But if you take it orally, the effect is quite unpredictable. I mean, we hear stories, you know, of people being gone for days. And when they come back, you know, well, you were doing this, you were doing that, and nobody remembers.
Yeah, this is definitely a triggering account for myself also, as I have consumed Datura, Brahmansia,
Okay.
several times in Papua New Guinea.
Okay.
And this was ingested with tea, and every single time it was, quite unpredictable, because you couldn't really control for how many flowers or the concentration. And yeah, like my memories are definitely something I'm still working with.
Excuse me.
Okay. And so smoking it, you think it's something that it's a little bit more manageable, a more growing experience than the full-blown ingestion and delirium.
Yes. Even though you may experience a state of delirium,
Yes.
you especially will have a developing acuteness of the vision
Okay.
and the hearing, and those are both signs to look for as the Datura effect is coming on. And then when I was looking at the Prague conference, and the idea occurred to me that perhaps Datura in small, low doses, as I've been able to establish through smoking it, could be a tool for therapeutic use. Because we need to, in therapy, somehow get out of in therapy, we need to somehow get out of the ordinary state of consciousness to really grapple with the problems that are encountered.
Especially with trauma or rumination. At some stage down the line, you need to break the cycle, and these kind of drugs are phenomenal in doing that.
And I think there's an added feature, which is that you retain the memory and the consciousness of what's occurring while you're under the influence of the Datura. Because as you yourself experienced, you had a very deep experience, you're still processing it. And
much of it is lost, though.
And much was lost, exactly, which is my point, that if we undergo these experiences and we want them to be something more than simply an ecstatic state, or in this case, more properly, a delirious state, we want the dose to be such that we can maintain consciousness and in fact enhance our consciousness.
Absolutely.
To help our perception.
And so smoking it provides the best tool to retain that control and staying in the perfect zone.
That I've found so far.
It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense.
And as I mentioned at the end of my talk, I'm welcoming people to be in touch, to share their experiences, and if they wish to start to work with it in a therapeutic situation, whether that be formal or informal, and of course that depends on the set, the mindset, and the setting, and in the case of Datura, perhaps more than anything else, the dose.
100%.
I think this could be a valuable new tool.
Have you experienced safety concerns in terms of smoking? Is it possible to overdo it by smoking it, or you would lose?
I think it's absolutely possible.
Is it possible? Yes. You
That's,
can go into full-blown delirium even with smoking.
Yeah, and that's why I recommend titrating your dosage.
Yes.
So beginning very small, seeing what the individual effect is,
Sure.
because of the variation in the plant, the variation in the individual. So seeing how that affects your individual biochemistry and your psychology, obviously, and then carry on from there.
And according to your personal experience, is it best to have Datura in isolation or combined with other entheogens?
I have used it in combination with other entheogens, but I would recommend that to begin with, that you begin with Datura purely.
What other entheogens have you found most beneficial to be mixed with?
In terms of smoking, I find a bit of marijuana is useful. And I've combined it with other things like LSD or mushrooms.
Okay.
But I have done that once I'm well established into...
And these are small doses of the others?
Small,
or flood doses?
No, full-on doses.
Full-on doses, okay.
But small doses of the Datura.
What kind of contribution do you think Datura added to the other full experiences?
Well, the acuteness of the hearing and the vision are definite results of having smoked it.
Do you think this is a peripheral effect, a cholinergic effect at the periphery, or central?
I think it's more of a central effect. And it also can give us certain clarity and add another dimensionality to the experience.
Very interesting. And in terms of smoking it, it will be very gentle since the flower actually tastes quite good. It's not very abrasive at all. It's a pretty nice experience. Quite cunningly nice. It's such a dangerous drug. But the combination that you mentioned that pleased my mind most is that with the betel nut in Nepal. Since betel nut, most of the psychoactive compounds in betel nut are actually nicotinergic. So they act at nicotinic acetylcholine receptors.
Yes.
While Datura, as we know, is a muscarinic player. Therefore, this combination would go to encompass the full cholinergic system to enhance the nicotinic component and suppress the muscarinic one. So I can see why it will be so powerful for your associate in Nepal.
And he told me that he could not remember his Sanskrit studies if he was not on a dose of Datura.
And this is something I would actually be interested to delve into as well, the kind of adaptations that would occur over a lifetime use of daily Datura. So you think that perhaps if consumption was to be stopped in him, that withdrawal effect would actually impair his function?
Well,
because that's what he described.
Yeah, because he was having the experience of state-specific knowledge.
Yeah.
And he told me very directly that if he stopped his Datura use, he could not remember his studies that he had done in the higher state with the Datura. Now, the amounts of Datura that he took, and especially because he ingested it orally.
So it was swallowing?
It was, well, you don't swallow the juice from the quid,
okay. So
but it's absorbed through the membranes in the mouth.
It's highly discouraged with betel nut itself.
Yes.
It's quite harsh on the stomach. So it would make sense in that kind of combination, especially.
That you spit it out.
And interestingly, withdrawal from betel nut itself has that kind of effect on memory. So I think it's a mixed model.
It could be. Yeah. It could be. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to do the studies beyond that before he passed away.
What eventually made him pass away?
I think just old age.
Just old age?
Yeah.
How old was he?
He was well into his 80s, I don't recall.
Okay, well this is remarkable considering the regimen he put himself through.
Exactly.
For the explorations you've done and what you've observed and studied, what kind of conditions do you think would benefit most from Datura?
How do you mean conditions?
Psychological ailments.
Interesting question. And as I'm not a therapist or psychologist,
there's a personal,
I think that I think that what I've observed is that in addition to increasing acuity of vision and hearing, which are really very key to developing any deeper understanding of oneself, because those two especially, you know, there's the association with seeing with the word seer in English, and in many other languages they have a similar sort of word, and to hearing. I always remember about the Chinese poet who at 60 said, "Finally, I'm beginning to hear."
Finally, yeah.
So I think those are two actually interesting aspects to the sensory enhancement that occurs under Datura. And I think there's also, it helps to relieve in a gentle way, if done in gentle doses, if you will, the blockages that keep us from opening up to ourselves and then sharing that experience with others when appropriate.
Okay.
So I think that it lends itself.
Trauma to some extent.
To trauma, definitely. And it allows at least in my experience, that your inner eye opens as well as your outer eye, becoming more acute and being able to look at those experiences perhaps with some distanciation.
Okay, sure, yeah. As a more of an unbiased observer of your own mind.
Yes. And at the same time opening you up in a conscious state by not taking too much of it so you blank out,
yes,
but still to where you could say you've disrupted your normal, ordinary state of consciousness so that you can begin to have those type of observations.
Have you perceived the changes in mood with continuous use?
Well, that's hard to say, but I think that in the moment, anyway, I do observe a lightness,
It's a lightness
of being, at
yeah,
least.
especially if it's the concentration is contained within limits. Because when it becomes too much, especially in my experience, I remember that the peripheral effects are pretty harsh in terms of
Yes.
the eyes and the mouth. It's just
Yeah, dry mouth, other
extremely
things.
dry, and even movements
Yeah.
become a bit hard.
Yeah. I find it also very good for getting in touch with nature. So
Yes.
that
I have
it
spoken with many trees, and people told me that I engaged in several conversations that I have no memory of. So
See, it'd be
there was
nice-
definitely a direct link to nature, for sure.
yeah, and it'd be nice to remember that.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear
absolutely,
what the trees had to say to you.
Yeah, and the mysterious phenomenon of phantom cigarettes as well, which you may or may not know about with Datura. People become, during delirium, seem to be smoking cigarettes that don't exist. And this is a very, there's many reports that point to this happening, at least in Western civilization. And I always wondered what elicits this.
That's interesting because of the ties to the use of nicotine.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that'd be something that would be interesting as we pursue this research to get more reports of, and maybe to do some specific studies if we can elicit that experience.
Exactly. And I think Datura has a tremendous potential, even considering the pharmacodynamics and the neurology of its active components, which are mostly scopolamine and atropine. I don't know if you have observed some of the latest studies that perused through the electrical activity in the brain under the effects of scopolamine.
No.
And in terms of brain EEG, the signature overall is remarkably similar to that of sleepwalking, which is in fact almost the same of what you see during delirium. The person seems to enter a state of sleepwalking.
Which, of course, is more akin to your studies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, in this way, I can see how scopolamine and to some extent atropine may warp the normal infrastructure of the brain to kind of shift it into an hypnagogic, dreamy state. And a particularly interesting one, which is that of deep sleep dreams, non-REM dreams, because that's the kind of signature that you see. Very different from REM dreams, which are the ones we know most about.
Right.
Scopolamine puts you into a state of non-REM dreams. And those are quite different.
Which would tie, in my thinking, to the use of it in Amerindian rites of passage to getting vision for the future of a young boy's life.
Yeah, because dreams, as I see them, are the endogenous psychedelic state, and the most powerful within standard physiology. And when drugs tap into that as powerfully as anticholinergics do, you see incredible things.
And that would give us access to, in a way, to the unconscious. And if the dose is of a proper amount, I'd say the potential to remain conscious during the dream state is enhanced.
Phenomenal, yeah, absolutely.
And the Sufis say that is one of the highest states of consciousness, is to be actively conscious in the dream state.
Oh, absolutely, and this is taught widely in the Yoga Nidra as well, and many other Eastern philosophies. This is excellent, Robert. I'm very glad we finally managed to delve into such a mysterious plant medicine. Do you still have a relationship with Datura?
Oh, yes. And I think out of this interest that emerged here at the Prague conference, that I'm going to now continue and deepen that work and also begin to quantify effects with dosage.
Oh, yeah.
I think that would be very helpful to others.
The power of Datura, so far anyway, is that because of its bizarre relationship with the human body, regulatory bodies didn't quite go to the extent of banning it, making it illegal, because it has almost zero abuse potential. So it is actually an entheogen that it is possible to work with. And with the right safety and the right practice, it will become a very powerful tool.
And the more we talked about it, especially at the conference, I'm beginning to hear more and more studies from people about their use.
Yeah.
And in fact, we were talking with some Italian women who told us that they use it as a preparation in bags for the scent to create a love situation.
Absolutely, and I have heard of accounts of people making creams with Datura, put it on the temples or on genitals, and actually using it for sexual explorations as well, in the right amounts.
And the setting of bones. In fact, one person
that's very interesting as well, yes.
made a comment after my talk that he had a bone set when he was in South America, I believe it was, and the doctors, when he got back to the States, could not believe how well it healed, and they used a salve made with Datura for that purpose.
Wonderful. I really wonder what kind of pharmacodynamic effect would actually make bones set so well. And that's very interesting. Have you been to Australia so far?
Yes, I love Australia.
Yeah.
I've spent time in the outback. I've been to Melbourne, Sydney. I've sailed and dove along the Great Barrier Reef. I've sailed up it twice to Thursday Island. And
well, the Australian Psychedelic Society, which I represent here today, its headquarters are in Melbourne. So
Perfect.
you are absolutely welcome to join us for more conversations, and we organize many events.
That would really be an honor and a delight.
And likewise, absolutely.
Look forward to seeing you down under.
Indeed. Well, we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Robert. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And please do call me Rio.
Rio.
In fact, in most of my things, I'm Rio Hahn.
Rio Hahn, yeah. It's punchy and
if you look for
it
Robert,
calls for Rio as well in the Amazon, which is of course important. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. This is Dr. Jackcharles for the Australian Psychedelic Society, broadcasting from Prague, the International Transpersonal Conference. Thank you.